This is a special Disciple Dojo episode. We have our dear friend, Reverend Dr. David deSilva, and he is busy getting ready for SBL, as am I. It's going to be exciting. We're going to see each other in person, I think next week or week after. But we wanted to do this video because, well, David, why don't I let them hear your melodious voice. They're used to mine. What do you want to share with Disciple Dojo viewers right now?
Well, today I want to talk about our tour,
Yes.
Our trip to Turkey, scheduled for August 29th through September. Oh, I should have looked at the brochure, September 8th or so. But anyway, around the first full week of September, where we're going to do a deep dive into archaeological sites in Western Turkey, most of which are directly pertinent to the revelation of John.
Yes.
And of course, while we're there, we're going to hit a few other sites that are more closely related to Paul, or not lying, just because some of them are really cool. And if you're there, it's best not to miss them.
Right. You go that far if you want to see everything you can. So let's talk about real quick. You've got a PowerPoint that you're going to sort of walk us through. You've been there. How many times have you been to what is now Western Turkey, what was in Scripture Asia Minor?
I should have an answer to that. I know I've taken like 3 in-depth tours, and then I've also kind of hit this or that based on larger cruises that I've gotten to be the guest speaker for. Best gig in my profession.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
I've probably been to Ephesus 8 or 9 times.
Okay.
For example. So, but I love it. Turkey is, I didn't come up with this, but someone says Turkey is also the Holy Land, because so much of the action of the New Testament and so many of the texts of the New Testament are directly related to this territory. Yeah. So it's always exciting to go there.
Yeah, that is something you and I were kicking around ideas of, putting this trip together, and there were some other options, Greece and Rome, and even the Holy Land itself once things settle down there eventually. But this was one of those that I was interested, because it, like you said, it is part of the Holy Land as well. I mean, there's just so much that happens there. And for our shared interests in Revelation, I thought this is a no-brainer for a first trip. I selfishly want to see the 7 churches. I always have for 20 years. I've been teaching this book in churches, and have always wanted to just be able to anchor myself in the locations. So you actually have taken a number of pictures of the locations, and I'm going to switch to PowerPoint view. So walk us through what we're going to see, where we're going to hang out next year.
So obviously, we have to go to Patmos.
Yes.
Because even though that's not technically Turkey, that's actually Greece.
Is it really?
It's one of the 1,000 islands.
Right.
That gave us the dressing. But obviously,
wait, is that really where 1,000 Island dressing comes from?
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
If that's true, that just blew my mind.
But in any event, yeah, islands just, 50 miles off the coast of Turkey actually are part of Greece. So this is Patmos today, or to be more honest, this is Patmos 2017. There's the cruise ship. The
cruise ship is the giveaway.
Patmos, right in the dead center. You can see it's a mountainous, beach-filled island, and this is where John says he was when he received the visions that eventually he committed to writing in the form that we know it in Revelation. And I think, being there is just really cool, and thinking as you look out onto the sea, was this where John was when in the spirit he saw a beast rising from the sea, or what have you? But it's also good to remember that Patmos was not a deserted island. Even, when John was there, it was a well-inhabited city on the trade routes between Roman Asia, Turkey, and Greece. Right now, there's a grand monastery that sits on the site of what would have been the Temple of Artemis when John was here. And there are inscriptions that you're not supposed to take pictures of in the museum in the monastery. But the monks aren't looking all the time. So what can I say? I'm that guy.
You accidentally tripped the finger,
I tripped, and my camera shot this perfectly framed picture, attesting to the activity around the Temple of Artemis right there.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, on an opposite peak, one can see the foundations, the remnants of the foundations of another Hellenistic period building, which might have been the twin temple of Apollo that was believed also to have been on Patmos. So all that to say, when John was here, it was a city with temples, with gymnasia, and therefore with large enough populations to support gymnasia. And there is no evidence that it was a penal colony.
That's what you always hear. That's what I've always heard.
Always hear it. He was condemned to the mines on Patmos, but no one has found mines on Patmos. Now, so granted, there was no beach resort that he was sent to.
Right.
He was put where he could be separated from the churches among whom he was preaching a very subversive, revolutionary message. But he was sent to a decently populated island. So we're going to have a nice tour of that. And thanks to Tutku Tours, I do have to just give a shout out to them. Yep. Tutku Tours is probably the premier agency for doing biblically based tours in Turkey. They're all Turkish, for one thing. I mean, they live there, they know the place, and they're committed to scripture and to education like few other companies I've ever come across. So,
well, they were great in putting things together and organize, like they've been super cooperative. And when we were first, batting these ideas around, there were a couple of options, but when you presented me with what Tutku was going to do, I was like, this seems like a no-brainer for sure. So that's awesome. I'm looking forward to meeting and connecting with them.
Yeah. We'll have a day at Patmos. We'll have a high-speed ferry to get us there, so we won't lose the day. We'll probably spend 2 hours getting there, and we'll have most of the day to explore this island.
That's so cool. And
we're also, of course, going to hit each of the 7 cities that housed the congregations that John was writing to. The 2 most impressive archaeological sites among those will be Ephesus and Pergamum. And Ephesus is probably the crown jewel as far as archaeology is concerned in all of Turkey. So we're going to spend a whole day poking around Ephesus, which is easy to do if you're really interested in Revelation and archaeology. It's one of the largest archaeological sites in the Mediterranean, period. So we'll see the civic forum, which is surrounded by kind of the early city's political structures, but also we're going to see how religion is woven into the fabric of the very government of Ephesus. We're looking right here at the remnants of what's called the Basilica Stoa, just a very wide columned portico that also functioned as a basilica, judicial functions and what have you. What's significant, though, is the basilica was dedicated to Artemis, to Augustus, Livia, and Tiberius, all of whom are considered gods by the Ephesian elders. And at the far end of this were statues of Augustus and Livia. In the center of the civic forum was a grand temple to Augustus and Roma, so that the whole civic forum became kind of the sacred precinct of an imperial cult temple. And when we think about the gospel and what it says about King Jesus and the empire of God, and what it says about the unreality of all other gods and the presumption of those who take worship upon themselves, a place like the civic forum of Ephesus just really brings home that clash and how that clash would manifest itself in the daily structures. I should have prefaced all this with an interpretative comment. When I first started learning about Revelation, I was 13. I was granted a very strange teenager because that's what I was interested in. But my first commentary on Revelation was, do you want to guess what the first commentary on Revelation was that I read?
I'm going to say Bruce Metzger.
Well, if if I had better guidance as a teenager and had not gone astray as so many teenagers will.
Hal Lindsey then.
You got it, man. Hal Lindsey, there's a new world coming. So Revelation is all about us. And Hal Lindsey did this thing. I didn't realize just how bad, I'm going to go out on a limb and say how disingenuous it was for him to do this. But he took the line from Daniel about sealing up the book for the time is, way down the road, and impose that on Revelation when the angel tells John at the end of Revelation, don't seal up the book because the time is near. And so this whole orientation toward Revelation that says it's all about us is all wrong as far as John was concerned. The time I've spent on the ground in these cities in Turkey has been of such great importance to me. If Revelation was indeed written, as I believe it was, to be understood by the Christians in Ephesus, it's so important to know what the Christians in Ephesus saw around them every day. What connections would they have made between their lived world, their lived spaces, and what John was saying? All that to come back to this, when John is talking about the cult of a beast who rules over the nations, languages, and people groups of the world, the people in Ephesus didn't have to say, I wonder when there'll be a one world ruler to whom cult is offered. It was being offered all around them to the emperors, and they would have made these connections instantly and understood the political ramifications of what John was saying. This was built in honor of the Flavian emperors, and possibly specifically in honor of Domitian in 89 and 90 AD. So what we're looking at is the approach to, and then the foundations of, the temple of Domitian, or the temple of the Flavian emperors, that was built on a large plateau, artificially expanded to make it big enough for the plans the city fathers had for it, overlooking the civic forum. So here's another great center of emperor worship looming over the activity of Ephesus below. And we'll get to see that. We won't get to walk around the foundations on top because we don't want the guards with whistles to be blowing at us and yelling at us in Turkish. Now, how on earth would I know that would be the consequence?
Yeah, couldn't be experienced.
And we won't see this inscription because it's perpetually locked away in a kind of inscription museum underneath that platform that we just saw. But I was lucky enough to get in there when a colleague was on location. I mean, that was so serendipitous. But we will see other inscriptions that show us the pride that Ephesus took in having won the right to house a provincial temple of the imperial cult, in the title Neokoros, and how in every one of its inscriptions, its official civic inscriptions, from that year forward, it talks about itself not just as the council and people of Ephesus, but the council and people of Neokoros, city of the Ephesians. And again, when we think about how emperor cult is now woven into civic pride so deeply, we can begin to imagine why withdrawing oneself from the emperor cult would be regarded as so unpatriotic, so ungrateful, and so unsafe for the city. And this is precisely what John is calling the Christians there to do in witness to the one Lord and his anointed one. Gorgeous street now moving from the administrative center of Ephesus down into the commercial center. And you have no idea how long you have to wait to take a photo like this between tour groups. I must have stood there for like 40 minutes just waiting for the right moment. Y'all won't have to. I'll share this with everyone. All along this, there are statue bases that were once topped with actual statues, honoring benefactors of the city, reminding us of the importance of local benefaction, but also memorializing gifts to these honors, these displays of gratitude. And at the base of this road, we're going to get to see the houses of the rich and famous of
Nice.
ancient Ephesus, the so-called terrace houses, which are basically townhouses. But you could walk in here, and if you forget that you're in Turkey, you can think that you're in Pompeii. The style of homes, the style of decoration, you can see some of the frescoes there.
Yeah, the color is what most of us aren't used to seeing color on ruins.
Well, that's absolutely true. And the ancient world was a very colorful world. Mm-hmm. But whatever paints they used, that they don't last for 2,000 years, right, unless they're buried like these houses were. Yeah, and some gorgeous frescoed walls and mosaic bearing floors, kind of showing us what the elite houses were like. And of course, we might imagine, how Paul went, I hate to put it this way, but went after converting some of the propertied class in every city so that the early church would have a stable place to meet,
right?
And converts who would be able to host traveling teachers and missionaries and delegates from church to church. And this takes us inside what the homes of the, in this case, we'll say ultra elite. Paul would really luck out if he made it to this level, but the ultra elite looked like.
That's so cool, because so many of us will think, ancient church at Ephesus, the church at Colossae. We'll think of like a building, a church, just 2,000 years of church being equated with a building. But being able to walk through something like this and imagine how would you do church in this type of setting? I think that's gonna shape, I know, the way I read the New Testament, but I think that's gonna really affect how people view especially letters like Ephesians and reading through Acts. So that's awesome. I'm super excited for that.
One of the things that we also have to bear in mind is that all the Christians in Ephesus didn't gather in one place.
Right.
They gathered in multiple homes because no one home was large enough to accommodate them. Mm-hmm. So we have all these house churches, and that was the norm until really the Nicene period. I didn't want to just leave it on this photo while you were.
You sure? You sure? Because that's inspiring. I feel the Holy Spirit. Something's moving within.
Something is moving as you look at this. But we got to be real too. We got to be real. It's not all about the yearnings of the Spirit in the ancient world. There are other needs to be taken care of as well. And Ephesus just happens to have one of the best preserved latrines from the ancient period anywhere.
Imagine how many business deals were conducted just sitting side by side there.
I know this is just one corner. There are actually, I think, enough seats for 40 or so people in this room. So, social distancing, modern invention. We'll talk more about this on site. Now, I included this photo because this is the most iconic monument of Ephesus. Mm. It wasn't there in the first century. It was only built in the first quarter of the second century. But it's a gorgeously reconstructed facade of a library funded by and honoring the memory of the Roman governor of Asia, Julius Celsus, in the time of Trajan. This, however, was there for Paul, not the tractor per se, but everything else here was there for Paul. This was one of the main entrances into the commercial forum, the commercial agora. So we'll get to see this. It was actually erected in honor of Augustus and his family by two of Augustus's freed persons, which tells us something of the economic status of imperial freed persons in the ancient world.
Yeah.
And then this is the interior. This is where a great deal of the business, the work of the merchants and the artisans, the vendors in Ephesus would have been done. 60 stone shops around the perimeter, a vast courtyard of 360 feet on each side, giving room for kiosks and carts and all the ways vendors could display and sell their wares. When we think about Paul and the work of Prisca and Aquila, we have to think about the commercial centers of these cities, and of course the Christians addressed by the letters themselves. So many of them would be of the merchant or artisan classes, making their living in spaces like this. Ephesus also boasts a beautifully preserved theater. This is the one where Paul's preaching and Paul's missionary success prompted that great Artemis revival led by Demetrius the silversmith. Give me the old time religion, Artemis of the Ephesians, great as Artemis of the Ephesians.
Right.
But it also reminds us of, the cultural life of these cities. We have cultural literacy. You and I, we can make references to Star Wars or the Marvel or DC universe or what have you, and be understood by many people.
Yeah.
Because everyone's seen the movies. And in the ancient world, Euripides, Sophocles, Aeschylus, Menander, the comic poet, Aristophanes, the comic poet, their corpus performed in venues like this to huge audiences provided the cultural literacy of the ancient world. So it's no surprise when Paul is able to quote a line, "Bad company corrupts good morals." 1 Corinthians 15. He's making a Star Wars reference there.
Yeah.
And from the theater, we can look down this large, beautiful street, which was admittedly broadened and repaved in the 5th century AD. So it's not just the way it was in John's time or Paul's time, leading to the harbor. And this is what made Ephesus such a commercial success among the cities of Asia Minor. It was one of the major ports through which trade from the east would move west toward Greece and Italy. It was a major hub in getting goods of all kinds to the heart of the empire. And, I sit here on the top of the seats of the theater looking out, and I think about John, thinking about how the cargoes of linen and wood and fine wood and cinnamon and spice and flour and choice flour and wine and olive oil and human souls, slaves, it would move down this street in a never-ending stream to the ships that were there waiting to take these goods westward. No doubt a lot of it to the heart of the empire that John saw as the great tick that sat in the center of the body of the empire, sucking it dry. So we're going to spend a lot of time in Ephesus. Oh, and I almost forgot. Ephesus, like many of these cities, is a testimony to the triumph of Christianity in these lands. Ephesus was a site of major churches, and the remains of one of them, the Church of St. Mary, remain accessible, fairly well excavated. And this is a baptistry.
Yeah, I was going to say, it looks like a mikvah, like immersion pool.
It does, but you notice it's got stairs on both sides. And scholars of the patristic period, I'm not one, but I trust them, look at this and they think the symbolism of this is that you enter from one side, you are baptized, and you exit on the other side because you're leaving a life behind you. You are descending into the earth to be buried with Christ, and you are ascending in a new direction into a new life for which you've been raised with Christ. So the architecture of 4th, 5th century baptistries is eloquent with the theology of the rite itself.
Yeah, it's a visual sermon.
Yeah. And of course, we'll hit the Ephesus Museum, which is full of wonderful artifacts. I could spend hours there. I won't make everyone do that. But we'll see cult images of Artemis of the Ephesians, the goddess that made the city famous with her temple, which was one of the wonders of the ancient world, one of the must-see sites according to ancient travelers. And the remnants of an imperial cult statue. Scholars argue, is it Titus? Is it Domitian? Either way, it's quite a visible testimony to the divinization of the emperors that just got so far under John's skin. You can't tell from the photo, but that forearm is almost as tall as we are.
Oh, wow.
It's about, it's only 4 feet. So the statue would have stood between 20 and 24 feet tall. And that's how, people were being taught to regard the emperor, larger than life, divine, worthy of the same honors as the gods. Now, while we're focusing on Revelation, there are some other great sites to see. Miletus is one of them. It's probably not even a half-hour drive south of Ephesus. So how could we not go to the site of Paul's farewell speech, farewell sermon to the elders of Ephesus, but also just a great look into a 1st or 2nd century AD city of Roman Asia Minor. Again, a theater, very well preserved, with bits of the stage building this time also pretty well visible. There's a very interesting inscription on one of these seats, which we'll look at, namely the place of the Jews and the God-fearers, which is interesting.
Yeah.
On the one hand, because it does bear witness to the use of the noun God-fearers, and another because it tells us how well integrated the Jewish community could be into the life of a Greek city. They had reserved seats for, Aristophanes and Euripides, or whatever the drama was du jour. Yeah. All those non-award-winning dramatists that we don't know about because their work was lost. We'll see a partially reconstructed stoa, or columned portico, that lines what was once called the Sacred Way, a road that connected Miletus to Didyma and was used in rites connected with the god Apollo, who was as big in Miletus and Didyma as Artemis was in Ephesus. Sibling rivalry, right? Like Apollo and Artemis, brother and sister. Another thing that we're going to try to pay attention to as we go from city to city are the inscriptions themselves and what they can tell us. And on this one, this is in Miletus, but the third line mentions, I should put you on the spot.
Yeah. I'm trying to read. I was reading the first line, but which one? The third one?
The third line.
Is that a iota in the middle?
There's an iota there.
Okay. Tanasiar.
Aziarchen.
Oh, that's a chi. Yes.
It's a chi.
My capital letter Greek reading is bad.
We'll get you going.
Yeah.
When we're on site. So the title Asiarch is
Asiarche. Okay. Ton is the article.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly right. And we read about Asiarchs in Acts 19. These high-ranking officials, they were part of the what's called the Asias, the Council of the province of Asia, who were responsible, among other things, for promoting imperial cult throughout the province. And some of these folks were the ones trying to dissuade Paul from going into the theater and trying to make a defense. I would imagine both to protect Paul and to avoid things getting completely out of hand. But here we have, how shall I say, the evidence that Luke gets a lot of his details right. Asiarchs were a thing, and we can find them memorialized in inscription after inscription. Miletus and Didyma are only about 10 miles apart. So we're also going to take a quick look at the Temple of Apollo at Didyma. And Didyma was one of 3 places where Apollo was believed to speak through his mouthpiece, the oracle. The most famous, of course, is Delphi, and the third is Claros, which is also in Roman Asia. It's also close to Ephesus. But you can get a sense here of the grandeur, the investment that the ancients made in these temples. You see those people there. Sometimes it's good to have people in the shot just for scale. This is a monumental temple with pillars 60 feet high and a vast interior. Once you enter it, you descend into this courtyard with a kind of smaller sanctuary with a statue of the god. This is the throbbing heart of worship in Roman Asia when the church was just getting its start, declaring all these gods to be nothing and all this activity to be impiety. Stealing worship from the one God and giving it to demons, John would say.
Yeah, who are so countercultural.
Exactly right. All right, so we're going to leave Ephesus and its surroundings. We're also going to see some fabulous things in Smyrna, modern Izmir, ancient Smyrna. You can almost see the letters preserved a bit. So Smyrna gives us a beautiful picture of one of the greatest features of Roman engineering, the aqueduct. cities were able to grow exponentially in the Roman period because of this technology that could keep growing the water supply that a city depended on. We're going to see the Agora, the Forum of Smyrna, which I would say, unfortunately, really dates from the 2nd century AD, not the 1st century. So it's the child of the Forum that John would have known in Smyrna. This was rebuilt all after a devastating earthquake, rebuilt by Marcus Aurelius. While we're there, we will look at the Izmir Archaeological Museum, which is full of rich artifacts, like this statue of an imperial cult priest, members of the elite whose donations in effect bought them the honor of officiating in the cult of the emperors. And then on the other side, there's an inscription commemorating a certain Claudius Aristophanes Aurelianus, who is a Neokoros of the Augusti, of the Sebastone, of the emperors. This is just a stretch of Roman road in Smyrna. The things that we take for granted, but Roman engineering, look at that. It's still roadworthy.
Yeah, you could still drive on it.
there are no roads in Florida that last 20 years.
Right.
And these are the roads that John would have taken on his circuit ministry to the congregations that were, in some sense, his responsibility, to whom he continued that ministry as he wrote Revelation. We're going to go to Pergamum, and we're also going to spend a full day at Pergamum because there's so much to see. Look at that hillside, that mountainside, where just maybe a third the way up, you see on a terrace the Temple of Dionysus, and then off to the side, rising up from the first third to the second third, this grand theater, or the remnants of a once grand theater, the steepest theater in Turkey, by the way. And then above that, we would have seen the Temple of Athena, the altar of Zeus, and now we see the re-erected remains of the Temple of Trajan, crowning the top, kind of off to my left there. A bold statement, as an acropolis of a city would be, about the piety of its inhabitants. Here we have at least 4 different cult sites visible at once. So here we're looking down at the altar of Zeus. I should just say the foundations of the altar of Zeus, because if you want to see the altar of Zeus, do I have this? No, I don't have it on a slide. You have to go to Berlin, to the Pergamum Museum in Berlin to see the actual monument. Oh. But this was a throne-like open-air altar with sacrifices being offered up to Zeus around the clock. And many scholars think that if there is an architectural correspondence for the throne of Satan that John talks about, it would have been the altar of Zeus.
Right. That's a top contender. For sure.
Because as Satan was the prince of demons, Zeus was the king of the gods. As far as John was concerned, the false gods that demons undergirded. We'll see the remnants of the sacred space that was the Temple of Athena. There's nothing really of the temple itself to be seen. Though again, if you go to Berlin, you can see the facade and the entry gate of the Temple of Athena.
It's Germans, man. They just took all the looted.
Well, it's very controversial. Yeah. But on the other hand, don't know how much of it would have survived if it were left in place, because so much of these structures was either repurposed for other buildings or, and this breaks my heart even to say it, burnt down to make lime, which was necessary for agriculture, but also for making plaster and what have you. So, we'll just leave it at that. Here's what remains of the Temple of Trajan, who was emperor from 98 to 117. So after the time of John, but still keeping alive before us the fervor that these cities had for the worship of the emperor. And we'll get more into this later, but Ephesus and Pergamum were in a kind of unholy rivalry with each other over what city could assert itself to have the greater devotion to the emperors. And that makes for a very challenging environment for the early Christian communities who had to withdraw from all of this, stand aloof, and even if they did what John said, witness against it, as somehow all of it being impiety rather than piety. And here, just an inscription from the gymnasium in Pergamum showing the same kind of pride in imperial cult that we saw in Ephesus, because Pergamum also starred always referring to its status as neokoros, as temple keeper of an imperial cult site. In its self-identification in these inscriptions. In fact, Pergamum had received the first such honor in 29 BC when it constructed a temple to Augustus in Rome that was the center for the provincial worship of Augustus. And that was before it was so cool to call yourself Neokoros. But here in this inscription, after Ephesus started calling itself the temple warden of the imperial cult city of the Ephesians, Pergamum started calling itself the first to be a temple warden of the imperial cult city of the Pergamines, looking back to that earlier temple. So it's and we'll trace that out when we're preparing for our tour. Here's another shot at the. Am I boring? Is this too much?
I'm trying to read the.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. Maybe I should speed this up for our viewers. Anyway, here's a shot of the theater.
Yeah.
Here's a shot of the remnants of the temple of Dionysus, and it's important to see how close it is to the theater, because and the same thing can be seen in Athens. The temple of Dionysus is just beyond the theater, at the foot of the Acropolis, because Dionysus was the sponsor, if you will, the divine patron of drama, and also the tragedies that were offered, that were performed in these theaters, were often performed as part of Dionysiac festivals. They were kind of a bloodless sacrifice that was offered to Dionysus. That's why people always die in these tragedies. They are kind of a dramatic sacrifice that make up part of the worship of this god.
Ancient passion play, but completely pagan.
Exactly right. On the other side of the hill, as we descend on the other side, we'll find a sprawling sanctuary of Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, of the harvest springing up and coming to fruition. But it's distinctive in that it has stadium seating all along one side for the worshippers to gather in and sit in to observe the rites that are performed to the goddess in the center. One thing that we're going to notice when we're on site that we might not always think of, the altars for all of these temples are always in front of the temple, never inside the temple. This is not like our churches. We go into God's house to worship. And the altar is inside God's house, as it were. But here it was always in front. And we worshipers didn't just, barge into the God's house. The God's house was sacred. Priests could enter it, not us. But the transactions that happened between the people and the God happened in front of the house on these altars. It's hard to get to, but if we're intrepid enough, and if we all wear long pants so the thorns don't get us, we can see this very interesting cult site for Dionysus in Pergamum. The altar is toppled, but you can see it. It's that white stone in the center of the depression there. It's hard to visualize, but this was a dining room that was sacred to the god. And the rim that you see around the center was, in effect, where food was set for the diners, and the diners would all recline on couches around the perimeter where the brown grass is now. So, thinking about dining at the god's table or participating in the table of idols as opposed to the table of the Lord, a site like this really kind of brings home what the table of idols could look like for Christians in the ancient world.
That's the kind of stuff that is exciting me about this trip, is being able to anchor those biblical concepts. And so it's not like, oh yeah, you went through the temple drive-through and got a burger. You're literally dining at the table of a foreign god. That's really cool.
So help me remember to pack my weed whacker so we can really get a good shot of this next time.
We'll clear it out.
And here we're looking down at the principal gymnasium of Pergamum. The columns, the colonnade outlines this large exercise area that right now is just littered with stones that once belonged to the building. And around it are lecture halls, a small theater, which we call an Odeon. This was the educational and athletic center for an ancient city. And Pergamum really sports one of the better preserved gymnasia in all of the Greek world. So it's great to see it. And at the far end are the remains of the bathhouse, the other kind of cultural icon of the Roman world, joined to this with its cold plunges, its heated sauna rooms, its warm pools. So here in one slide is so much of the formative and cultural world of the early Christians.
Yeah, we're going to be, immersive. So we will tour this naked as the rules.
Wow. Here's an image to delete. Okay. So the reason we're spending a day in Pergamum is I don't want us just to see the Acropolis and walk down both sides of that hill. I want us to also make a pilgrimage to the Asclepion in Pergamum, which is another well-excavated, well-reconstructed building. So we'll walk part of the sacred way between the Acropolis and the Asclepion. And we'll come to this. I mean, the Asclepion, a place sacred to Asclepius, the god of healing. These were the health spas of the ancient world. And people would come here sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, depending on your HMO, sometimes for months. Just kidding, no HMO, just rich elite hypochondriacs taking advantage of the place, and would await a revelation from the god in a dream, telling the person how to find the cure for whatever ailment, physical or psychological, brought them to the health spa in the first place. In the meanwhile, the place was equipped with its own small theater, able to accommodate maybe 1,500 spectators. It had its own pools and bathhouse. It was, it was a 5-star resort / temple shrine. Here's just a small part of the partially underground sleeping chamber that you would go to in the hope that the god would visit you and give you the formula for the cure. Wow. So the 3 sites, Ephesus, Smyrna, and Pergamum, have a lot to offer us. They're going to be very rich. Prepare for disappointment. Thyatira has next to nothing. That is the cost of having a site continuously occupied. So there's very little space to do excavation in the modern city that has grown up over ancient Thyatira. So we're just going to be able to get a couple of glimpses into the kind of really a 2nd century AD arcade and its remnants. Let's see. Yes, there's one thing that I identified from the 1st century. It's this inscription that celebrates the Emperor Titus. You can see at the top line, Titon Vespasianu, Titus, the son of Vespasian, etc. You can see in the second line, forget the first letter, Autokratora. That's the Greek word for imperator or emperor, what have you. So, but most everything in Thyatira will post-date the 1st century. It does have a nice museum. Small museum with a few interesting artifacts. And here's one that I'll just throw out now. Whenever we think of the 7 lampstands and the seven lamps on their lampstands in Revelation 1, a lot of people are tempted to think of menorahs. And I don't know why they do that. Because first, the word is different, even from the Septuagint. And the other is there are 7 of them and they are separate because they can be removed, as Jesus threatens. If you don't repent, I will remove your lampstand from its place. And so here we see what we could see in almost any museum in Turkey or Greece. We see a lampstand with a lamp on it. This is probably the more correct mental image to have for what's going on in Revelation 1. Okay, Sardis. Sardis is better. Sardis will make up for Thyatira, particularly in this expansive temple of Artemis that we have in Sardis. This was raised in the Hellenistic period, so it was in full swing when John's audience was living here. Yes, I do. I've got Third pillar from the right, you can see two visitors.
Yeah.
So just for scale, you get a sense of how vast this temple is. Those people don't come to the top of the first column drum on top of the bases. Artemis was big throughout all of Roman Asia. Ephesus had the grandest temple. Sardis had a fairly large one as well, even though it was probably only 1/4 the size of the Artemision in Ephesus. We'll see a thoroughly reconstructed facade of the Sardis Gymnasium. This is an amazing 3D puzzle. I wish I had thought to put a picture. When we do our pre-tour interviews together, when we prep folks with those webinars, I'll be sure to get a picture of what was actually found. It was the most amazing reconstruction experiment I know of. But anyway, this would be the main hall and entrance for the gymnasium. Behind it were the bathhouses. In front of it was the exercise yard. Again, I'm going to say somewhat unfortunately, it's a late 2nd century AD structure, but it shows us the importance of the gymnasium in Sardis. Here's a picture of the swimming pool right behind that grand facade. It's seen better days. It's
need some chlorine in there.
Yes, yes. It's about 4 feet deep, so it is okay for swimming. Just keep your legs high. We'll also see a 4th century synagogue. Now, my head is so stuck in the 1st century. I have a hard time getting excited about 4th century anything.
Boring.
But I don't want to be a wet blanket for other people. And as far as excavated synagogues go, this is pretty amazing. Here we're looking at the apse of the synagogue, which is done up like a small council chamber.
Right.
So obviously where the elders of the synagogue would be there. And there were no other seats in the synagogue. People would otherwise stand or sit on the beautifully mosaic inlaid floors. You see the table dead center for the reading of the Torah and whatever other liturgical acts might have happened. But I just have to say, isn't it odd to find images in the synagogue? If you look on the side of the altar, you can see an eagle. And if you look to either side of the altar, I don't know what function these actually originally served, but you can see lions. I'm thinking they must have been the bases for other tables or something. And this happens throughout the Mediterranean. If you go to synagogues throughout Israel from the 4th or 5th centuries, you see amazingly rich mosaics of animals and figures, even zodiacs and what have you. So we've come a long way in our interpretation of the second commandment by the 4th century, let's just say.
The old syncretism.
Yeah. We prefer to call it progressivism. Anyway, at the back, there are still the niches that once housed the Torah scrolls. Here's a better shot of both of them, the so-called Ark. You might see the difference here. This was an earlier visit. Synagogue is not covered with Kevlar. My most recent visit, synagogue is now protected with a Kevlar roof.
There we go.
So completely protected from the elements. We're also going to head to Philadelphia, or I guess I should say Philadelphia, to get the 1st century Greek pronunciation right. This is another place where, just prepare for disappointment. There's not much. Every bus will make us stop here at the supporting pillars of what was once the Basilica of St. John, a 6th century structure with some, sarcophagi and what have you from mostly the late Roman and the Byzantine period. I'm going to make us also go, at least, to see where the Stadium of Philadelphia used to be. You can see how this perfectly preserves the right depression for a stadium, even though almost all of the seating has been repurposed for other buildings. That's the downside of recycling. What could have been a gorgeous stadium is now just hills, but you can see where largely chariot races would have been enjoyed by the increasingly Romanized population of Philadelphia. And then this is how it was when I was there in 2016 or 17. But the remnants of a theater are also there to be seen in Philadelphia. It has been cleared out and much better excavated. So I'm looking forward to seeing that on the next time. So 4 winners, 2 not so great sites. That's just the luck of the draw. Yeah. Laodicea makes up for Philadelphia just the way Sardis makes up for Thyatira. Here we're going to find an amazingly excavated site. I say amazing because all of this has been done in basically the last 10 years.
Oh, wow.
It's incredible what archaeologists and their teams have done here. Here we see, I'm going to say essentially a late Roman, early Byzantine street, but this is the main road that bisects Laodicea from east to west. And on either side, we'll be able to see both residential and small industrial settlements. We're going to see the main commercial agora of the city. It's not in nearly as good a shape as the one in Ephesus is, but you take what you can get. There are several bathhouses in Laodicea. At least 4 have been discovered and excavated so far. This is the so-called central bath, probably the oldest, the one with the best chance of having been there in the 1st century. And here is another kind of just 2 sides of what is a vast forum waiting to be more fully excavated. You see the mound of dirt off to the right. All of that's got to be moved before the whole square can be revealed. Now, I wish, again, that I had thought to do a before and after picture. When I went to see this in 2017, maybe just the top tiers were visible and theater-like, and everything else was just kind of collapsed stone and grassy knoll. 4 years later, it's a gorgeously excavated, complete theater with a good amount of its stage building visible. So this is just the burgeoning work of archaeology in Turkey these days. They are going above and beyond to recover their heritage. And this is a fountain house commemorating the Emperor Trajan, built in the honor of the Emperor Trajan. There's one like this in Ephesus, which we'll also see, but not nearly as well reconstructed.
Where did Trajan fall within the emperors, like Nero, Domitian?
Again, Trajan was 98 to 117, so he's later than Revelation.
Right after Domitian.
Right after Nerva. We can't forget poor Nerva.
I had forgotten poor Nerva.
You forgot Nerva, but he gave the empire 18 months of regaining stability after Domitian, and he's the one who nominated Trajan to be his successor, under whom the empire reached its vastest expanse in history, which is something, I guess, both to be celebrated and lamented.
Especially reading Revelation.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. So the another great structure in Laodicea is this temple compound. The facade of the temple is well reconstructed, and the courtyard, the sacred precinct of the temple, is also fairly well marked out. Behind it, you can look down into the basement of the temple, which appears to have functioned as an archive and a bank. Temples were banks in the ancient world because it was not just robbery to steal money from a temple, it was also sacrilege. It was exponentially worse, and it made you the enemy not only of humankind, but the gods themselves. So temples were the safest place you could deposit your wealth.
Is that the Lycus Valley in the back?
I've got to be
in the wrong direction.
I've got to be honest. I don't know, as I sit here, what direction we're facing. So, and I'm just this is me being honest. I try always to be honest rather than just make stuff up.
How dare you? What kind of scholar are you?
Yes. So this is just another beautiful colonnade, but this would have been also the sacred area, a sacred area of Laodicea. Inscriptions show us that there was once a temple of Athena and a temple of Zeus in this sector of the city. So a lot to see. We can spend hours in Laodicea. Now, those are the 7 cities addressed by Revelation, but just as we're hitting Miletus and Didyma when we're close to Ephesus, we're also going to hit while we're close to Laodicea. Hierapolis is maybe 12 miles, And if you read Colossians attentively, I know you have, JM, I'm talking to your whole audience. If you read Colossians attentively, you would have come across the name Hierapolis, because Epaphras, the same fellow who evangelized Colossae and Laodicea, evangelized Hierapolis as well. So we're gonna check out Epaphras's other pastoral charge. Again, because of earthquakes, a lot of what we'll see in Laodicea, what we will eventually see in Colossae, when Colossae is actually excavated, all post-dates the time of the apostles, because there was a devastating earthquake in 61 AD, and it took generations for these cities to recover. So almost every structure is going to post-date 61. Like this. This is one of the main gates to the city, leading on to the main artery, and it was erected in honor of the Emperor of Domitian by the then governor of Roman Asia, Frontinus by name. In Hierapolis, we're going to see a rarity in the ancient world. We're going to see a plutonium, not the element, but the sacred site, a sacred shrine to Hades or to Pluto, the god of the underworld. There's a statue of him in the Hierapolis Museum. Another great museum we're going to take in. These local museums have so many rich artifacts in them. We're going to hit them all.
Is that the dog beside him, or is that a
that is Cerberus, yes.
I was going to say, is that a three-headed dog?
Three-headed dog. It's a three-headed dog, yeah. All the love, 3 times the appetite. But what's cool about the plutonium here in Hierapolis is it is a gateway into an underworld crevice, and noxious gases, really just carbon dioxide, was being released from that. So priests would walk in with sacrificial animals, and they've been trained to hold their breath for like 4 or 5, for 3 or 4 minutes, the priests, not the animals. And the animals would come out dead, not from having been slaughtered with any knife, but as it were, the spirits of the underworld choked them. It's been sealed off, by the way, just so stupid tourists can't go down and experience for themselves. Becoming sacrifices to Hades. As always, a beautiful theater. A city is not a city in the Greco-Roman world without a theater. Again, while this was erected in the 2nd century, it gives us a really nice taste of what a stage building looked like in any century. And if we look really closely, I just flipped ahead to see if I had any photos of them. But the mythic cycles of Artemis and Apollo are told in a bas relief frieze that runs across the stage, so we can see episodes from the lives of the god and goddess who were probably the most important pair in Roman Asia, kind of told in pictures for us. There's also the remnants of a so-called nymphaeum, or fountain house. Every city had something like this, a public place for the drawing of water, that would have a large kind of reservoir-like pool that would spout water out of the reservoir into troughs, but also be decorated with gods and demigods associated with water, be it the sea or the rivers, nymphs and what have you. And this is what JM really wants to get to.
Yeah, we got to go here.
This is just off the side of Hierapolis. These are kind of the white cliffs that were formed by the hot mineral springs that naturally feed this whole region between Laodicea and Hierapolis. And so if you were to step into this, it looks kind of like it's a glacier, but if you were to step into this water, it's about 105 degrees all the time. So it's a really nice warm bath.
Yeah.
And it's mineral rich. Archaeologists hate this water because it had flooded over the city of Hierapolis. So they had to tunnel through between 1 and 2 meters of this travertine marble, this precipitate marble, to get to the floor of Hierapolis. That was hard. I'm glad I was not involved.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely going to get in that. So bring your bathing suit, folks.
That's right. That's right. Now, a city that I insisted we put on the itinerary but has no connection to the Bible as a site, is Aphrodisias. And that's because Aphrodisias is just a marvelous monument to imperial ideology in the 1st and 2nd centuries. So the way I read Revelation is largely an attempt to back up far enough to get a God's eye view on the propaganda that was filling the cities of Roman Asia about the gods, about the emperors, about the benefits of Roman imperialism, hiding the costs to the common people of Roman imperialism, etc. So to go to a place that was just blatantly celebrating Roman imperialism left and right can tell us a lot about the other story that John was frankly declaring war on. And it also just has some amazing structures that you won't see this complete elsewhere. Here we're in a bath complex in Aphrodisias, and we can tour some pretty well preserved hot and cold rooms, both here. See, the sauna phenomenon in the ancient world. I mean, this is where Roman deals were made. But you can see the engineering. The floor of the sauna was raised about a meter off the ground by these piles of ceramic tile, and hot air would be blown in underneath the floor then from a furnace, and often also through clay pipes in the walls to create the sauna effect. And this is a millennium and a half before anything like modern engineering for creating a sauna. For me, the highlight of Aphrodisias is the Temple of Augustus, and we're standing on in front of the Temple of Augustus at this point, looking out at the grand walkway, if you will, that leads up to the temple. And originally, this walkway was 3 stories high on both sides. And you can see on one side, part of it has been reconstructed. And on all of those floors were these panels with scenes of mythology and scenes of imperial mythology, the way the emperors are presented, scenes of provinces represented as captive women, in effect, who have been brought under the dominion of the emperor. The scenes themselves have been removed to the museum on site in Aphrodisias. So we'll get to see, for example, how Augustus is depicted being crowned by the goddess Roma with a victory wreath, while he himself is adorning a trophy, a Roman symbol of victory, which is basically just some Roman armor, helmet, and weapons, etc., on a post, while a captive kneels at his feet and below the trophy. And that could be just a female captive, or more likely the representation of a province that Augustus, I should say a territory that Augustus has conquered and made a province of the empire. Or, for example, on the other side, winged victory on the right, and I think it's still Augustus on the left, together adorning a trophy with a bound captive at its feet, and Zeus's eagle at Augustus's left-hand side there, while Augustus's right-hand side. Again, just these images of how divine figures stand behind the emperor's victories and the empire's conquests and expansion. On the left here, Claudius, depicted as Lord of earth and sea. He's got one foot on land with a figure representing land. He's got the other foot on the waves with a figure. You can barely see sort of the fishy or eel-like tails on that figure representing the sea. His cloak billowing like a halo over his head. Or Claudius again on the other side, this time as a warrior, beating down Britannia into submission. So imperial ideology at its rawest, and it's most extreme here. Another thing Aphrodisias gives us is a stadium, full-fledged, with all of its seats still there, not stolen for someone else's backyard project. So a fabulously well-preserved hippodrome, circus, that sort of thing. A temple to Aphrodite, obviously with the name Aphrodisias. You know, this city is dedicated in particular to the goddess Aphrodite. And a cool sort of structure called a tetrapylon. You can see sort of four sets of four columns, each one of which is a pylon. And this served nothing more than a decorative function at a crossroads in the city. But this was fairly common in cities of the ancient world. You could find them in Jordan, in Jerash, for example, and if we could ever do enough archaeology, in Antakya, in eastern Turkey. This is a very common way to adorn intersections, just for no other purpose than to say, hey, look, we're a rich city, we're a beautiful city, we're a happening place.
Yeah.
Another theater. But by the time we get to Aphrodisias, I think all of us are going to be like, oh, another theater. So, and I wanted to sort of get this out there to people too. We're not going to be roughing it on this trip. Tutku has lined us up with some very attractive places to stay. So 2 of the nights we're going to spend at the Korumar Hotel in Kushadasa, which is maybe 5 miles away from the archaeological site of Ephesus. So I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to just sitting there and watching the waves of the Aegean crash against the rocks as I drink my morning coffee.
That's going to be nice. Absolutely.
I might just spend another week here when we're done. I see if I can get a special rate.
Yeah, you'll be worn out.
And then he's booked us in the Movenpick Hotel in Izmir. We'll spend 3 nights altogether there. Again, no shabby place right there on the Aegean.
Yeah.
Because Smyrna, Izmir, was also a seaport city. We can look forward to being well fed. So hence I made sure to include a picture of a breakfast buffet on one of these slides. And I'll just say to our travelers, count on a good breakfast and a good dinner, and lunch will likely be what you have brought with you from breakfast. We have so much to see at these sites. Yeah. I really don't want us to lose an hour and a half trying to find a restaurant and feed ourselves. And we've already told the guides, you're not taking us to one of those shops that gives you a kickback for us.
That's right.
And then, and you'll especially like this one, JM. They've booked us at the Doga Thermal Spa Hotel in Pamukkale, which is right outside of Hierapolis. And I couldn't find a good picture of an average room with 2 beds. We're not going to suddenly stick 3 of you together in a room. That's not the message here. But you can see it's a gorgeous hotel with an atrium overlooking a thermal pool. The same water that feeds those white cliff areas outside of Hierapolis feeds this hotel. So this is where I'm going to jump in. Probably not on the Hierapolis site.
I'm going to do it all. Yeah, I want to be either hot or cold, not lukewarm. So there's the hot part of it. The goal of the trip, for those who are watching, I mean, this part of this video is just, some of you watching aren't able to go, but you're just like, well, that's really cool. I didn't know about that background of the 7 churches. We're going to be also, I'm going to be encouraging us as a group to read David's book, Unholy Allegiances. It's a short paperback about a lot of this background, the stuff in Revelation that John was presupposing and the stuff that we're going to be seeing, and how today it challenges us in our own age and with our own versions of Roma or Artemis or any of the others who vie for people's loyalties. So I'm really looking forward to that. We have this trip is about, as of right now, as of the making of this video, about half full. So there, folks, if you're watching this, there's a link. It's a video description below. So you tap on the description, it'll open up, and there's going to be a link to how to register for this trip. If you want to come with David and I and 24 other friends, counting you, then we'd love to have you on the trip. And all of the logistics, everything is being handled really well by Tutku. So yeah, do you have a 1 minute elevator pitch for viewers, David?
If they have been here this long, they don't need a 1 minute elevator pitch. That should have been how I started. I do look forward to it. I mean, archaeology has enriched my engagement with Scripture immeasurably. I didn't do any of this sort of work until 2011, and my sense of the biblical world just opened up so much that I haven't stopped going over to the Eastern Mediterranean in some form or fashion since. It really opens up the biblical world.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited. Like I said, when we were planning this, Revelation is my favorite New Testament book. To me, this is a no-brainer of where I would want to go if Disciple Dojo's taking a group of people and taking along a world-class scholar as our guide and staying in great places, seeing a part of the world that, it doesn't, when you think Holy Land, you usually think Jerusalem, but this is part of the biblical world. And I can't wait to get there and to be immersed in it. So we're going to have a blast, folks. Sign up, and we'll have a waiting list if it gets full, and there may be some people that drop. So if we reach capacity, still put your name out there if you're serious about going. The deposit do we have the firm date on that? Or I know it's in February sometime. That's on the website.
I believe it was February 1st or 2nd.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of time.
Yeah.
But don't wait, because like I said, this with no advertising so far, the trip's about half full. So who knows what that's going to look like within 1, 2, or 3 weeks from now. Well, David, I appreciate you coming in. I love always having anytime. You've got an open door policy at Disciple Dojo, and I'm looking forward to seeing you very soon out at IBR and SBL. So thanks for sharing all this, folks. Sign up for the trip and come with us. It's going to be a blast. All right. That's all for now. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for tuning in to Disciple Dojo. As always, keep training. We'll see you next time.